I'll wait. It says online with Facebook Live, but could be my, ooh.
There we are.
Are we
All
on?
right.
Oh yeah,
Yep.
there it goes.
Yep, you can start then.
All right. Here we go. Well, welcome everyone, all of our viewers, people from all over who are tuned in tonight to the first forum that we're having with our domestic militarism committee. And tonight we're talking about the 646 arrestees. I'll just quickly fill people in about this committee or our group called End Domestic Militarism. It was formed this fall by members of Women Against Military Madness and others. Our goal was to make a connection between foreign wars and our wars here at home. Wars like Standing Rock and the heavy militarization at Standing Rock, the militarization in Minneapolis during the George Floyd protests in Portland, the equipment that is being used and the equipment that continues to come out. And we really want to focus and dig deeper into this domestic militarism. And we thought this was a great way to start, focusing on this recent militarism with the 646 people arrested on the evening of November 4th. So we have three speakers tonight. We have Meredith Abbey from the Anti-War Committee. Her group was one of the co-sponsors of the action, and she was also one of the people arrested that evening. We have Jay Yates with the Twin Cities Coalition for Justice for Jamar. And many of you might know that this group was formed after the murder of Jamar Clark by the Minneapolis Police Department on November 15th, 2015. And this group recognized the need to continue gathering people around the fight against police crimes. And they believe that this fight can and must unite Black Lives Matter movement and everyday working people in the community. And we also have the Minnesota Uprising arrestee support, and that's being represented tonight by Treya Thiel. She uses her pronouns. She's been with the group since the October 7th arrests at the Minneapolis 5th Precinct. The group of activists and arrestees from the uprising began this summer, and there are also people who are movement veterans. Some went to trial during the Philando Castile protests. And the goal of the arrestee support group is to provide support to movement arrestees to make them aware that they have a network of comrades and options for fighting legal charges that don't have to include cooperation with the state. So we welcome all of you here. And I'm going to just pass it to Emma for some of the technical aspects.
Thank you, Diane. Hi, everybody. I'm Emma. I'm on the End Domestic Militarism Committee. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and joining us tonight. I know it's a little bit late, but it feels maybe even later because it's very dark outside. I just wanted to let you know that we are live streaming this right now on Facebook on the End Domestic Militarism WHAM Facebook page. It's also been shared to WHAM's larger Facebook page. If you have a question at any point for any of our speakers, any of the panelists, if you could type those questions in on the live video that's on the End Domestic Militarism page, then we will go through those questions and ask at the Q&A at the end. You can also type questions in on YouTube or on Periscope if you're watching there. But if just on Facebook, if somebody shared this and you have a question, make sure you're not asking the question on the share, that you go back to the original location of the live video, and we will definitely see your question if you ask it there. So I think with that, we will head into our first speaker, who will be Meredith.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm really excited that WHAM has this new committee. We in the Anti-War Committee really agree that this is a concern that the anti-war movement needs to be thinking about, because the fact of the matter is that not only are we paying for war in other countries, but this war that we wage in other countries has multitude of consequences, and some of it is that it comes home and then is used on the anti-war movement and other movements at home. So to start off, I wanted to give some context for what we're talking about, which is that this protest was on November 4th. Some of you might recall that that was right after a presidential election, and we have a president who was saying that he was still the president. He was talking about refusing to give up power. He was talking about how this was an illegitimate election. And so TCC for J, who's going to speak later, and other organizations said, regardless of who wins, regardless of what the election is, we want to have a protest that says Trump out. And we want to have a protest that says that we want to defend, the people's right to choose, a new path for the United States, that we have a people's agenda, and we in the anti-war committee were really excited about that. In terms of if you're wondering like, well, why is the anti-war committee involved in this protest? That at the core of it was very focused on Black Lives Matter, which I think is appropriate, not only nationally, but particularly if you look at Minneapolis. This is where the George Floyd uprising really started. But we in the anti-war committee really think it's important to look at the fact of like what the damage is from Donald Trump for 4 years. And lots of other parts of the movement focus on what he's done domestically, but we in the anti-war committee focus primarily on what he's done internationally, although we have done a lot of work on his Islamophobia and his attacks on the Muslim community at home. And that definitely intersects with the issues in the Black Lives Matter movement and the racial justice movement in the Twin Cities. But he's really gone out of his way to stand with Israel, stand against the Palestinians, to really make it harder for there to be a peace process there. He's made it harder for there to be a peace process with Iran. He's increased use of sanctions against Iran and Venezuela. I mean, he has a lot of blood on his hands in terms of what he's done. But I also think it's important to understand that the anti-war committee wasn't signing on to this protest because we're pro-Biden. The fact of the matter is that both parties are parties of imperialism. They both really are like pro the U.S. using its power to, steal resources and they say influence, I say imperialism and other parts of the world. And the fact of the matter is that people in other countries don't care if the president is Republican or Democrat, if they're starving your citizens or bombing your people. But we thought it was important to be a part of this larger coalition to say that we don't want any more Trump. That's not saying we wanted Biden, but we don't want any more Trump, but that we wanted there to be a progressive people's agenda, and we wanted to move forward with that agenda. So the actual night of the protest, we gathered outside of Mayday Books, which for those of you who are in the Twin Cities know that we also call Mayday Plaza, which is on the west bank of Minneapolis. And we had a rally there, and then we marched through that neighborhood, and then we marched on to I-94. And some of you might be going, wow, you guys marched into I-94 and you're surprised you got arrested? I think it's important to recognize that actually there have been a lot of protests that have happened, particularly in this period post-murder of George Floyd, where people have taken the highway. And there has not been any other time where 646 plus people have been arrested doing that. And matter of fact, not even a month earlier, people had taken the highway taken that same highway to protest the decision in the Brown and Taylor decision. So the fact is, people took to the highway to try to have a militant action. This was not planned civil disobedience, which I think is important for people to understand. We were not getting on the highway and then refusing to leave. We were getting on the highway, and then we were literally within a foot of the front of the march being able to get off the off-ramp, and we were boxed in by cops. It was Minneapolis police officers, state troopers. They were members of the National Guard, who basically kettled the protesters in. And they not only prevented us from getting off the highway, they prevented people from getting off the highway by climbing the fence or leaving the other direction. Like, people tried to leave before there was an announcement that said that we were under arrest. And I think that's important for people to understand. And I think that's going to come up in the legal battle if this goes to trial, is that people did try to leave, some people, and they were not allowed to leave. Other people were, stood there, but some people tried to leave and they weren't allowed to. There was no dispersal order. At no point were people given the opportunity to leave. People were just told that they were under arrest. in terms of looking at what the 646 plus people look like, I think it's important to get a visualization of what these people looked like. Not everybody looked like me. Okay. I am a representative of a part of a group of people. Like, so I'm a 47-year-old white woman, but the fact is that I was protesting next to a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old and their parents. I was also protesting next to an 80-year-old woman who's a member of WHAM. We also had teenagers who were with us. You know, we had lots of people from the anti-war movement, from WHAM, the Anti-War Committee, Veterans for Peace. We also had people from multiple environmental rights groups. There was a labor contingent where lots of trade unionists were there. There was a feeder march that had happened from the University of Minnesota. There were immigrant rights activists there, and there were families there. So that protest of those 646 people looked like Minnesota. And so I think that's important for people to understand. And so when we were kettled, when we were kept there and we were told that we couldn't leave, I think it's important to also have a visualization of the fact that what that group of people looked like, who were honestly about to get off the highway, who weren't allowed to leave. What the National Guard had to do is they had to shut down not only the part of the highway we were on, which was going towards St. Paul, they shut down the highway on the other side too. They shut down 6 lanes of traffic going to St. Paul and from St. Paul and Minneapolis for 5 hours in order to arrest the 646 plus people that were on that highway. So we were given charges of being public menace. We were given charges of walking on a highway. But the fact of the matter is that the public menace was the state troopers. They made it so that nobody could use the most used highway in the Twin Cities for 5 hours. Whereas if we would literally have been off the highway in less than 5 to 10 minutes. And so I think the public nuisance for that night really goes to them. I also think it's important to understand that this is after the governor has this mask mandate. The governor has been doing all this work talking about the fact that we should be, social distancing and people should be wearing masks. I saw a handful of state troopers who were wearing masks. We were surrounded by and arrested by and kettled by hundreds of cops not wearing masks, who refused to wear masks, who refused to step 6 feet away from people when they were asked to. And I think that that's important to understand. I also think it's important to understand why we're putting the pressure on the governor for this campaign, and it's because the state troopers were called out by Governor Walz. This was definitely a coordinated attack, and I think that's important, which leads to my last point, which is why is it important for the anti-war movement to stand with the Black Lives Matter movement and to stand with the 646 plus people who were arrested on that night? And I think it's important because 1, it's about defending the right to protest. 2, it's about the fact that they are trying to criminalize dissent. And it's not about whether or not you think that protesting on a highway is a particularly important form of dissent, which I do, but that's fine if you don't. But the fact of the matter is that having the right to protest on that highway, how does that easily bleeds into whether or not we, as the anti-war movement, which we've done lots of times, have the right to take over all the lanes on Hennepin Avenue without a permit, which we do all the time. And so if you think back to what we were able to accomplish during the war in Iraq, we had protest after protest after protest of 20,000 plus people. And the reason why we could do that is because we didn't have to file for a permit. We didn't have to jump through all these hoops. We just used this thing called the First Amendment to be able to take to the streets. And if we allow them to kettle protesters and define where we get to be like this, I see it as a quick slippery slope to really reducing the amount of space that we have. And lastly, since George Floyd's murder, the city of Minneapolis, the city of St. Paul, the state of Minnesota have done nothing to make it less likely that another innocent person is going to be murdered like that. And so we are literally days, seconds, months, I don't know, from more George Floyd uprisings. And if they are allowed to criminalize dissent like this, they are making it harder for people to express their justified public outrage about the killings of Black and brown people in our community. And rather than criminalizing the right to protest, they should spend that energy, Walz in particular should spend that energy making it less likely that there'll be any more state-sanctioned murder. And so we think it's important for the anti-war movement to stand with these 646 protesters. And we think it's important for us to recognize that the anti-war movement is linked with these other movements. I think the most inspiring thing about that night was the fact that everybody joined together and really stood with each other in solidarity. People did, know your rights trainings with each other. People supported each other. People lent each other cell phones. We did some real movement building that night. And that's what we're going to keep doing, because that's how we're going to stop war. And that's how we're going to stop police brutality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Meredith. For anyone that hasn't heard Meredith speak before, that is exactly why we asked her. That was great. I just wanted to remind everybody that if you have any questions for any of our speakers, or any questions about this topic in general, please feel free to type those into Facebook or into YouTube or into Periscope, wherever you're watching, so we can ask those during the Q&A at the end. So we're going to move on now to our next speaker. Next, we have Jay Yates.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Jay. I use they, he pronouns, and I'm representing TCC for Jay tonight. And I just sort of wanted to build off of the really great introduction that Meredith already gave, and just talk a little bit about how overwhelmingly violent and oppressive the police actions were that night. And how this has not only set a precedent for moving forward, but it's also an escalation from how they've been treating particularly like groups of protesters of color and protesters that are protesting for Black lives, how this is an escalation of that behavior in previous years. I only recently joined TCC for Jay this summer for the Taking Back Pride protest, but I moved here for college right around when Philando Castile was killed, and participated in a lot of protests with that as a student, and also participated in some of the initial Standing Rock kind of solidarity protests that have sort of led into the Line 3 protests. So basically what happened, as Meredith already said, on the night of November 4th, we were confronted by hundreds of cops, many of whom were not wearing masks, and many of whom were really prepared to become violent. I mean, when you're faced down with a bunch of cops in riot gear, who are, sort of pressing in on the crowd, they've brought like a big sonic weapon with them. There's not really any other way to interpret that other than an escalation. And the police here have been escalating violence towards protesters for years. I remember at one of the Philando Castile protests, which was on a highway. As a side note, a lot of people seem to think that going onto the highway is like this newfangled thing that people have started doing. People have been going on highways for forever, and have never been met with this sort of overwhelming force. But I remember that the police acted similarly at that protest, but with much smaller numbers. And because of those smaller numbers, it wasn't really possible for them to do what they did to us on November 4th. But because of all of this interagency cooperation, and because of, Walls's wanting to teach us a lesson, that's how they managed to kettle 646 plus people on a highway that we were already planning on getting off of. And yeah, I think that should worry people. I think that, it's already been stated, but when the police are escalating actions like this and having, this sort of overwhelming show of intimidation towards protesters, it means that we're on the right track, I think, but it also means that we have to sort of buckle down for more intense state repression. And that's why getting the charges dropped for the people that were arrested on November 4th is so important, because like if this goes through, it sets a precedent for other protests, and it sets a precedent for this kind of behavior. And yeah, I mean, the police actions towards the 646, there were sort of two groups of people that night. There were the people that were on the highway, including myself, and the other organizers. And then there were people up like past the wall, kind of watching us from, you know, the on-ramp near some apartment buildings. And what a lot of people don't know, and what a lot of the organizers didn't fully know until after the action was over, was that police were extremely brutal to the people that were trying to film them and trying to see what was happening. People were beaten with bikes. The horse cops were, you know, brutalizing people from horseback. People were wrongfully arrested just for looking at an officer wrong, for like filming, which legally is they are allowed to do. And then for us on the highway, you know, keeping a bunch of people kettled outside in the cold, forcing us to sort of huddle pretty close together because we couldn't spread out with the police sort of barricade encroaching on us, forcing, you know, kids to watch their parents get arrested in front of them and taken away from their parents, you know, forcing us all to be out there for 5+ hours in, you know, most of us marched for a short march. Like we weren't planning to be, you know, kept on a highway outside for that long. We had elderly people there. We had people with disabilities and people that needed to get home and take medications. I mean, just the actions of these police were extremely cruel on multiple fronts. And so I think that TCC4J, rather than sort of falling into the trap of, you know, like we were a peaceful protest, so that means that we deserved to be treated well. No matter whether a protest is violent or not, which I would also argue that destruction of property is not the same thing as violence against actual living human beings. That, you know, whether a protest is violent by the standards of the state or not, those protesters still have rights. And we still have a right to occupy streets that we pay for. And we still have the right to be treated without fear of brutalization. And one of the things that the organizers were really afraid of was when the cops started asking the press to leave. Because we were very acutely aware that part of the only reason that the people that were up on the wall were getting brutalized and we weren't was because the press were down on the highway with us, and everything was being filmed. And so when they told the press to leave, and Jess from TCC4J said that at one point she heard them say to line up against a wall, which was very dystopian and very concerning. We were worried that they would feel that all bets were off, and that they could do whatever we wanted to us. And, you know, with a bunch of children present and with all of us organizers present, it was an opportunity for the police to really visit violence on us in a way that they maybe hadn't been able to do. The other issue that I wanted to bring up was about Amina Mccaskill. And I won't talk too many details of her case because obviously it is an open case, but she's facing felony charges for allegedly shining a laser light at an officer. which, regardless of whether that happened or not, does not warrant a felony charge. And Amina was basically, dragged away on the spot. And we all watched her get taken away. And it was definitely a moment where the police were intentionally trying to antagonize the crowd. And they were intentionally trying to force someone to either defend themselves from the police or just instigate us to retaliate against them, snatching people or beating people. And so we worked really hard as organizers to try and keep people from taking that bait. Not because we think that, defending yourselves from the cops is bad, but because we knew that we were outnumbered, surrounded, and that the cops were looking for an excuse to hurt people. And we want to make sure that Amina and other people who are facing felony charges aren't sort of left out of our political pressure, and reminding state officials that it's not just, the 646, it's also the people that were arrested on felony charges on the 4th and the people that were arrested and held for months from actions this summer. Just the way that protesters are being treated right now by government officials is, in my opinion, unconstitutional. Not that, anybody really cares about the Constitution. I mean, this is the United States. Our Constitution's not very good, but, I think that we have to care. We have to care about this moment, not just for those of us who were arrested on the 4th, but we have to mobilize this momentum to get everyone freed, and everyone who was arrested on often completely fake charges over the summer to be released as well. So TCC4J is mobilizing several different techniques for doing this. We have a Twitter storm coming up to basically raise some more public awareness so that we can get more participation in protests and also in call-ins. We have plans to go be annoying at some of these government officials' houses, really whatever it takes to get people to sort of rally behind the arrestees and the arrestees from this summer. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have. And I'd like to thank the Anti-War Committee for inviting TCC4J to speak, and hand it back to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. I just want to say that in all of the events and protests that I go to as a photographer, you're always one of the speakers that I really like to hear from, and can't tell you how many hundreds of photos of you speaking I probably have from this summer. I just want to remind everybody that we are doing a Q&A when this is done. So if you have questions for any of the speakers, to please put them into whatever platform you're watching this on. Also, if you haven't yet, if you could share this live stream on whatever platform you're watching it on, that would be really awesome. We don't have very many questions yet, but sometimes that means that our speakers are just doing a really great job in covering everything. So don't limit it to questions, though. If you have any comments that you want to add, or hey, good job, you can even put that in there and we'll relay that to the folks that are with us tonight. We had hoped to have somebody from the ACLU of Minnesota to speak for you guys tonight, but that wasn't possible. So I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes reading off a couple of things from their website. There's a little guide on the ACLU of Minnesota's website that says, what if I'm attending a protest? And there's a little section about what if police order protesters to disperse. And this list talks about how shutting down a protest through a dispersal order must be law enforcement's last resort. And I know it was already mentioned that there was no dispersal order given that night. Even if people would have wanted to leave the highway, it wasn't an option, and everybody was just kettled. So the ACLU says that this must be a last resort. police may not disperse a protest unless there's clear danger of riot, disorder, interference with traffic, or an immediate threat to public safety. Obviously, there was brief interference with traffic, but as you've already heard, the police ended up keeping the highway closed for hours and hours after this would have happened if they would have just been able to leave as they had planned to. If officers issue an order to disperse, they must give reasonable opportunity to comply. So in this case, there was no order to disperse and there was no opportunity to. It says including sufficient time and a clear exit path. The exit path would have been the ramp to get off the highway, but that was blocked. And protesters must receive a clear and detailed notice of a dispersal order, including how much time they have to disperse, consequences for failing to disperse, and what exit route they can follow before they may be arrested or charged with any crime. So again, there was no dispersal order, there was no clear exit, there were no consequences, there were just announcements to everybody sit down, you're going to be arrested, which is kind of abnormal. I wasn't there personally. I was in Washington, D.C., and I was watching a live stream of this happening, which was an interesting experience for myself because I know all of you that were there, and I'm a movement photographer, so I knew everybody that was filming, and I was very thankful to be able to tune in via live stream. I also wanted to point out that there is a lawsuit that you can check out on the ACLU of Minnesota's website to a class action lawsuit that was filed in July that addresses, well, I can just read you the little summary. The lawsuit alleges that the Minneapolis police and the Minnesota State Patrol used unnecessary and excessive force to suppress people's First Amendment rights to assemble peacefully and speak out against injustice. Peaceful protesters were tear gassed, pepper sprayed, and shot with foam bullets and flashbangs to intimidate them and quash the protests. Law enforcement often fired without warning or orders to leave. So obviously this is different because this happened over the summer and it's not for what happened in November, but it's just more evidence of like the tactics that have been used and that there has been a history of not giving orders to leave, having a heavy-handed response when it's not necessary. So I just wanted to tell you about those couple of things, and I can put the links to these in the different platforms where you guys are watching. And I'm also, while our next speaker talks, I'm going to put in links to the Facebook pages for each person that has joined us. If you want to check out any of the organizations that they work with, if you're not familiar with them, you can check out their Facebook page and like their page and support them if you'd like to. So next, we're going to move on to our next speaker. We have Treya Thiel.
Hi, my name's Treya. Thank you for that introduction. I am with Minnesota Uprising for Arrestee Support, otherwise known as MUAS, or you might hear me say Mouse. We have said often in our meetings that there are far too many acronyms in organizing work, but what can you do? So just a little bit about how I got involved with Mouse. I was actually arrested. There was, speaking to Jay's point, that there have been several mass arrests all summer long, and even prior to this summer, during protests. I was arrested on October 7th outside of the 5th precinct among 50 other folks. Allegedly, we were unlawfully assembled. And every single one of us it was similar. I mean, we were kettled, we were our masks were removed to take photos. Cops were not willing to take their masks, wear masks. And we spent the night in Hennepin County Jail. I do not recommend it. And when I was released, there was a group of folks waiting for me and for us, and they had snacks and they had water and they had rides, similar to November 4th. Folks from Mouse were also waiting to help, which was fantastic. So when I was offered that support during the whole movement, I'd sort of been wondering, aside from frontlines work, how could I truly be useful? Where are my energies sort of best placed and best used? And when I found out about the organizing work that Mouse was doing, I decided to jump in on it, because what a lot of people don't think about is that after the protests and the arrests happen, the sort of shine comes off and the cameras go away. And the judicial system is extremely expensive. It's draining, it's tedious, and it's long. It takes years, especially with the number of cases we're looking at right now. This can be a years-long process. You're in and out of court. And I mean, it's scary and it's discouraging. And because the attention goes away, court proceedings are incredibly boring. I don't know if you've ever watched an actual court hearing, but it's not like the movies. People who are stuck in it often don't have resources, and it's designed that way. It's designed to be discouraging. It is designed to intimidate you. It is designed to drain you of your money and your energy and your time and get you off the streets. And so the goal of Mouse is to support people who have been arrested during the uprising. The organization is sort of a small group of activists and arrestees, like Diane said, many from this summer during the George Floyd uprising, but also it fluctuates. And we have a lot of council members who also were arrested during the Philando Castile protests, who have been through this process before and kind of know how to give us this advice. And it started this summer with just a small group of people doing jail support for one another, showing up to take people home after they'd been in jail, or show up at court hearings just so you know somebody is there kind of rooting for you, and holding arrestee meetings with one another. This was in June and July, and now it's grown into what we have now, which is we have a spokes council, we have several working groups and committees that one of our goals is to work with the community to sort of show that protesters and community small businesses are actually together, because one of the things the media is trying to do is show protesters as sort of the reason that businesses are being shut down, and we want to show that we're actually kind of together with them. Each new group of arrestees is invited to have any level of participation in our work that suits them. We really want to encourage participation. We're very anti-hierarchy, and we want people to have a level of autonomy in this scenario and be able to make decisions for themselves and for their peers and for their comrades. What Mouse really wants you all to know, and us all to know, is that there is really a lot of power in the numbers that we have. There's collective power in that. During the Philando Castile protests, several folks were charged with misdemeanors and were able to pressure the courts, saying, none of us are going to take pleas until the few people who have felony charges get those dropped or reduced, and it worked. It won't always work, but that is the goal of this sort of community action. So a lot of charges have been dropped, but like Jay was saying, and I'll touch more on this later, a lot of folks are still facing serious charges. So I also want that to be at the forefront of people's minds, that it's not just this is a small piece of a much larger action. As far as ongoing work, Mouse does not organize for you. Our purpose is to give you a platform to connect with each other. We are here to give legal advice, what arrestee organizing can look like, but what it does look like is actually up to you all as your own group. There are, of course, good reasons to take plea deals, and we don't want to shame anyone for making those decisions or pressure anyone not to make those decisions. But what we do want you to know is that you have options, you have tools, and you can fight charges if you want to, and you don't have to cooperate with the state, and you can keep being out in the streets and fighting, because like I said, their purpose in this is to discourage you from continuing that work. An example of that is from the summer, the folks who were arrested at Powderhorn during the eviction of the camp at Powderhorn were connected through Mouse, but have their own action going now. And a bunch of them are banding together to help one another get their charges reduced. Similarly, those of us at the 5th Precinct are banding together to do something similar. We've got a few felony charges among us as well, and we are working to help those folks get those charges reduced by continuing to pressure the courts. And the reason that works is that you clog the court system. The reality is that the courts don't have the money or the time or the resources in any way to take everybody to trial. So if you continue to say, nope, we're not going to do it, eventually some people have to get their charges reduced or dropped. So now I want to talk about I-94 and also I-94 as a piece of this larger picture. So I want people from 94 to understand that this situation is certainly unprecedented. It is a display of power. It is a display of, it's, muscling people out of the movement. It's discouraging. Misdemeanors are a way to criminalize protesters and folks who are part of the uprising. That being said, think about 646 people who have misdemeanors, except for one, Amina Mccaskill, who Jay Yates was speaking about, who is facing serious consequences. Mouse has tracked 1,000 people cited and detained in relation to the movement work since the uprising, and this is before the 600 plus arrests. So that's for context. Over 100 of those are felony charges. Some are federal felony charges for protest work since May. So again, this is just what we experienced. Looking at that I-94 protest is a much smaller piece of a bigger picture. Some of these people were arrested from the riots in August, uprising in May, and it's been trickling, through the summer and a little bit of the fall from the original action. But yes, so I want to just briefly talk about one example is Montez Lee. Montez Lee is facing arson charges for a crime he didn't commit. He was in federal prison for 5 months before he even had his first court appearance, and he is still in federal prison while the judge sort of just deliberates on what they're going to do. There's a lack of evidence, but Montez is still sitting in prison waiting to hear what's going to happen to him. So now I want to pivot a little bit. One of the questions we do get a lot is, I'm going to circle back to what we do. A major form of arrestee support is financial, and there have been some questions about our finances. And so Minnesota Freedom Fund, who I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, is an organization that raised $40 million this summer for protest support. And there was sort of an outpouring from all over the country of people sending them money because it was advertised that they were the folks to donate to help people, fight these legal charges. And this summer, Mouse organizers brought Minnesota Freedom Fund to the table to get funding for protest support work. And we're under the impression from that meeting that MFF, that's Minnesota Freedom Fund, would fund us open-ended for this work. And now, just in the last week, we found out that that is not the case. We are working to figure out what that means and what we can offer. But our resources are now, they now have an end date, and it's more finite than we had anticipated. We did think that any costs related to arrests and legal support could be covered. We were helping people pay for parking, recovering wages for time spent being detained, childcare, all of those, parking for when you're in court. But right now we are still offering as much as we can. We can't offer attorneys to every single one of the 646 folks that were on the highway. We are prioritizing those who are facing bigger issues. There are some folks who have immigration concerns, probation concerns, and we're working with National Lawyers Guild to make sure those folks get attorneys first, and most of them have. So kind of next steps for everyone to, if you want to be involved in the work that we're doing, the number one thing is on our website. We have a list of the folks who are still in jail and facing more serious charges. We'd love if you'd support Montez Lee. Sending him a letter is huge. And the information to do that is on our website, mnuprising.org. Watch our media. Our Instagram is at mnuprising. And then I know the WAM will be linking the Facebook as well. And then send us an email if you do need support and you haven't yet gotten it. We will do our best to help you. We, again, are prioritizing people who have like urgent work concerns, probation, immigration. We do have 2 upcoming sort of workshops for folks. We just hosted one last week on pro se representation, which is representing yourself in court. And we're having a part 2 for the folks who enjoyed that and want to represent themselves or want to learn a little bit more about how they do that. You'll be getting some guidance from the Lawyers Guild lawyers. And the other meeting is for people who have those urgent employment concerns. The registration details will be coming soon, and you can find those on our Facebook page. So that's all I have today. Thank you so much to Women Against Military Madness for having us. And I'm going to hand it back off to you.
Super. Thank you so much. Lots to think about, lots that the speakers talked to us about. I think this one, a particular question came in, and I'd like each of the speakers, if possible, if you feel like that, just kind of answering this in just 2 minutes or so for each. What does this mean for future protests, and especially, say, during the trials that are coming up in March for the killers of George Floyd? How do you see this? How do you see future protests happening, and what that means for the future? So I'll let Emma spotlight our different speakers, or have you all on, if you could.
Yeah, if anybody would like to answer that one and you just want to start going, I'll just make sure that you're on the screen.
I could take a crack at it first if you want. I think it's important to understand that their intention of this is to try to make it less likely that people will show out in the streets. And so I think the number one responsibility of people who care about Black lives, the people who really think it's important to have movements of dissent in this country, I think it makes it even more important for people to find a way to be politically active in this period. And different people, that means different things. Like, I'm not telling you that you have to go out and protest in the street if, because of the COVID numbers that are happening, that means that you should put yourself in, serious health jeopardy. Like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there's a wide spectrum of actions. If you are able to go to a protest, I think that now is a critical time to keep going to protest. This is not a time to be like, oh, I think somebody else has got that covered, because the fact is that they want to isolate our movement. They want to make our movement seem like they want to make people think twice about whether or not they come out in the streets, and this is the wrong time to do that. We have done a lot in the Twin Cities around since the murder of George Floyd. This is not the time for us to take our foot off the gas pedal. This is a time for us to keep moving forward. And so I think that's important for people to understand that you have to still keep coming out to protest. Second, when these trial dates come up for these killer cops, or as I said before, they're going to kill somebody else. They haven't changed any of the policies that, that sort of set the stage for George Floyd to get murdered. And so I think it's important for people to be ready to go out again and not say, oh, well, look what happened. I think that's important for people not to do that. And then lastly, you could call Governor Walz any day you want. You could email him any day you want. You don't need there to be a call-in day. You don't need WHAM to share that with you. You could just Google him. Okay? It's really easy. The state of Minnesota pays for this whole infrastructure for you to talk to him of your own free will whenever you want. I just typed in Governor Walz on my little screen here, and I got min.gov/governor/contact. Boom, right there. You can fire him off a little email, and he does respond. The response sucks, but he does respond. And so I think that it's important for you to do that. They also give you his toll-free phone number, 1-800-657-3717. And so you could call him. But the fact is that there doesn't even need to be an organized protest to take political action. But wherever you're at, it's important for you to keep doing what you're doing and then up and up, because we are literally defending the right to protest in the state of Minnesota, and we need to keep it. And the other side, they're not giving up their right to protest. If you need evidence of that, you can look at the Facebook feeds of those weirdos protesting without masks, and guns in front of the governor's mansion. Just to let you know, the other side isn't backing down. So this is 100% the wrong time for us to be like retreating.
I could also maybe take a stab. 100% what Meredith has said. And then I think that people also need to sort of think critically about like risk and like really what like doing something risky means in this situation. A lot of us in sort of like organizing circles have sort of brought up the fact that, how do we sort of like reach these people that are, like liberal, but they're sort of like sitting on the sidelines and they're like, well, these people all got arrested and like, I don't want to jeopardize myself. Like, I think that, obviously COVID is a big deal and obviously like getting arrested isn't a joke, but I guess I really want like liberal white people to sort of rethink like who is assuming like the most risk in these situations, and how can you sort of like mobilize your privilege to sort of spread some of that risk around, because a lot of the people that got arrested on that highway were not people that can afford to get arrested. Plenty of them were people that took that risk because we knew that it was important enough for us to be out there and important enough for us to be civilly disobedient in that moment and to be there. And like that does come with a certain amount of risk. And every action in this country that has ever meant anything has come with an amount of risk. And so being risk averse right now, as Meredith was saying, is really not like, it's really not the move right now. We can't be thinking about ourselves as individuals. We have to be thinking about ourselves collectively and how we can best sort of consolidate power and get as many people on our cause as possible. So that's my little 2 cents about that question.
I would agree. The only thing I would add is like, we are in the age of information, so there will always be a way to find your comrades after the fact. Like as far as, what we do at Mouse, like there's always going to be a way to connect and get the support that you need on the back end. And like I mentioned, of course, there are always pretty big risks for some, but for those of you who realistically like can afford it, like I made that choice. I said, I work in nonprofit, I'm white, and this is a place like I can put my body on the line, and many people can't. And it's not the place for everyone, but I completely agree. Like this is not the time to back down, because you have resources and you have support from your community.
Well, thank you everybody for answering that one. We actually haven't had too many questions because I think everybody covered everything really well. So we're coming up to just about an hour here. So I think we're just going to end. And this is going to be on our Facebook page and on YouTube and on Periscope if anybody is just tuning in now and wants to go back, or if you want to share this with other people, it'll be there. So with that, we're just going to end our live stream. If anybody wanted to unmute and wave and say goodbye, you could do that now.
Thank
Bye,
you for
everybody.
hosting us, and
Thank you.
committee and WHAM.
Yes, thank you very much for everybody that did accept our invitation to speak, because as we did say, we're a brand new committee. And we haven't done anything yet. This is our first thing. So it's a good first one. Thank you. And I did put in the links to all of your pages and the comments and all the platforms. So hopefully everybody here will get a few more followers for their different organizations. So thank you. Good night, everybody.